Greetings and welcome to VB Drumming. I am Mike von Beardingham, and this is the first part of my course called Basic Rock Rhythms. Now don't be fooled by the fact that I class these as basic rock rhythms, for I consider these the foundation, the very building blocks of what it is to learn to play drums. Without these, you would not be able to go on to more advanced drum beats, drum fills, and develop all the necessary techniques needed to play more advanced drumming. If you listen to rock and pop all throughout the world, all throughout the decades, you will find some degree or variation of these particular drum beats involved in them. Also, once you have become competent at playing these in their basic form, you can then add your own flair, your own style, and your own dynamics to really bring them out to their full potential. So without further ado, let's crack on. Good luck. See you on the other side. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the first beat on the road to drumming greatness and glory. Now, these first beats we're going to learn, I have never had a student in all my years of teaching not be able to play these within 15 minutes of first sitting down at a drum kit. So you will have no problems. If you take your time and apply yourself and just follow what I'm doing slowly and carefully, you will come out the other end being able to play exactly this with no problems whatsoever. So we are going to start off, first of all, as we're seated at the drum kit, our right foot on the kick drum, our left foot on the hi-hat, our left hand on the snare drum, and our right hand will be crossing over onto the hi-hat like so. That's simple. Now, we're going to start with exercise 1, and this is the most basic rock beat that anybody ever learns. Whenever you hear drummers talking about where they first started, this is where we all start. Now at first it will seem a little bit tricky, your body will try and do things that it's not used to doing, and all the problems you have with coordination will become very, very apparent very, very quickly. But do not be discouraged. All is well, all will be fine. So, we are going to start off by counting eighth notes. Now, we are working here with bars of 4/4. Now, there are several ways that you can count this. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4 in quarter notes, or we can count eighth notes, which are 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And that is what we're going to count because that is what the hi-hat is going to be playing. So, like so. So we're just doing a constant, continuous tapping with our right hand. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now we're going to do this at a very slow speed because we're going to need to incorporate the feet and the hands in. So you're going to need that time for your brain to process what is going on. So we're going to do it about this speed. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now on the 1 and the 3, we are going to bring in our right foot. So we are going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So the way we can count it, we can say stamp instead of 1 and 3. Stamp and 2 and stamp and 4 and. Or if it's easier, you can say stamp 2, stamp 4, stamp 2, stamp 4. Or another way that I like to count it is say tap in between, and this will become apparent in a minute. Now once you've got the hang of that, so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. We are then going to try and bring the snare drum in on the 2 and the 4. So that will sound like this. 1 and 2. Now this is where saying stamp, tap, and also together is a good way I find of first getting used to this. So what you have is you have stamp, which is your hi-hat and your foot, tap on its own, together is both hands playing together, like that, then tap afterwards. So you get Step, tap, together, tap, step, tap, together. Now that sounds very slow, but play it at that speed and that will give your brain time to comprehend everything it needs to do. So, step, tap, together, tap, step, tap, together, tap. 1 and 2 and 3 So those are the different ways you can count it. They all come round to the same thing, but as we start to play along through the different exercises, being able to count in these different ways will be really helpful. Now, what I tend to do when I play through these exercises, I will not start counting all of the hi-hats, because what I want to do is focus on what I call the impact points, which are the kick drum and the snare drum. So when I'm playing a basic rock rhythm like this, instead of saying what I will count, 1, 2, 3, because those are our impact points. So, again, very, very slowly. Step, tap, together, tap. And what will happen is sometimes you'll probably do this. You'll go, and you'll play all 3 limbs at the same time. It's perfectly normal. Your body is going to do some really interesting things when you first try and play all of these exercises. You'll get things will hit at the same time, things will hit when you don't expect them to. What you are doing is breaking down your body's natural laws of coordination. So whatever you do and however stupid you start to feel because your body will not do what you want it to do, don't worry, this happens to all of us. So, again. Step, tap, together, tap, step, tap, together, tap. 1 and 2 When you get comfortable playing at that speed, then try and put it together and bring it up a little bit. Then maybe a little bit faster if you can. And try and use whatever counting feels comfortable for you while you're playing these exercises. Now, there's a few pointers I want to point out before we carry on to the rest of the exercises, because if I tell you now, you can apply them to the rest of the exercises. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and then try and sort of maybe rearrange things, look at the way your technique is. So the first thing, with the kick drum, we do not want to do this. Kick the kick drum and leave the beater on the skin, because all that does is muffle the sound. If you hit it and let the beater come off, you'll get more of a bounce and also the sound will continue. With the left foot, at the moment, we are just keeping the hi-hat closed. We'll be using open and closed hi-hats later on during the lessons, but at the moment, we are just keeping our foot nice and firmly on the hi-hat. The other thing with the right foot on the bass drum, there is what we call a sweet spot on the drum pedal of where you will get the best bounce and the best response and the most power. Now, if you push your foot forward right to the butt where it stops your foot from going any further, if you use it there, granted you'll get a fair amount of power, but you won't get much bounce and you won't get much control because it feels like you're almost using too much of your leg to do what you need to do. If you slip your foot too far back, you'll find it's counterproductive. You'll be able to get a lot of bounce and a lot of swing, but there'll be no power there. And you kind of feel like you're having to sort of tip your foot over to actually get the effect you want. Somewhere in between the two, and you will find this as the more you play and the faster you have to play, you will find an area which I would say is probably around 3 inches, or in man inches, 15 inches. Where you'll find the sweet spot on your pedal. So you can see here, by looking at the camera on my feet, I put my foot to the butt of the pedal, so right at the front, slid down, say maybe, yeah, about 3 inches, something like that. And there you will find there is a good place to use this pedal. Another thing with the bass drum is you will see I'm using heel up, what's called heel up technique. Now this technique, as Dave Weckl stated quite a few years ago in one of his drum DVDs, said that modern pedals aren't generally designed now for the use of heel down, which was what a lot of the early drummers used to use. Now heel down and heel up both have their advantages and disadvantages. Heel down, you can get a lot of speed, and if you ever watch drummers like Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, these players from kind of the sort of the 50s era, and also some of the drummers from the 60s, you'll see them using a heel down technique. But with modern pedals, it's not quite as efficient. We use heel up technique, which means literally rest on the sort of this part of your foot here. Is that the ball of your foot? Thank you, Dan. That is the ball of your foot. Lift your heel up, rest on there. If you're not sure how that works, rest your feet on the floor and then just literally lift so you're almost on your toes, as though you're just sitting there tapping away. You can just bounce your feet, and that is the sensation and the area we want to use on the feet. So just lift the heels up, bounce them around a little bit, and that is the technique we want to use. With heel down technique, you will find that, okay, you can get quite a lot of speed, but also you will feel a lot of pain down the front of your shins. So that's why a lot of us drummers use heel up technique. Some drummers will use a combination of the two, but we all have to find what we're comfortable with. So regarding the hands, with the hi-hat we want to try and keep the hands nice and relaxed, but not so relaxed that our sticks start falling and dropping everywhere. With the left hand on the snare, the same principle applies. Now, we don't want to hit the snare drum and leave the stick on there because it chokes the sound. A stick, when you play the drum, naturally wants to bounce off. And by stopping it doing that, you are taking away the natural momentum of the stick, because the bounce from that hit is something that we will use and utilise later on. So we don't want and stay, we want hit and the stick returning to its original position. Now you can see when I hit there is a kind of whipping motion. This will come in time. Don't expect to be able to suddenly be perfect straight away. You'll find that you'll probably hit, the stick may drag a little bit while you're getting used to this, but if you can try and concentrate on this from an early point in the lessons and something to take note of, it will progress a lot quicker, and it will be something that you won't have to go back to later on and correct. So when we hit, we let the stick bounce off, come back to its original position. Now generally, my stick is kind of floating about maybe 2 to 3 inches above the drum. That is where we want the stick to come back to. People do use different techniques. Some people do choke the drum, some people will slide the stick across to give a kind of brush effect while they're playing. These are all things we'll come to later on in other lessons. There are multiple techniques that people use when it comes to the snare drum. But at the moment we just want that impact bouncing off. So when I combine these, and you'll see the bass drum beater come off, the snare stick will come off. If I did it with everything hitting and staying on there, you can hear it sounds quite awkward, and there is no ringing in the drums, there's none of that natural ambience that you want to have when playing a drum kit. So moving swiftly on to exercise 2. Now all we are doing here, and for the majority of these exercises on this page, we are just adding in extra bass drum hits in certain places. The hand pattern is going to remain consistent throughout all of the exercises. So, with exercise 2, we are adding in an extra bass drum on the and of the 3. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, in this exercise we are going 1, 2, 3, This is what I mean by counting the impact points, because here, this way, I can actually emphasise what the bass drum and snare are doing rather than counting just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and in the eighth notes. So that exercise again, nice and slowly. Exercise 3. Here we are just adding an extra bass drum on the and of the 1. So we're getting 1 and 2, 3 and 4. So again, it's just a gradual progression. There's nothing that's going to take you by surprise here. We're just taking that concept of adding the bass drum on the and putting it to the 1 and. Exercise 4. This one's a little bit trickier because we bring an extra bass drum in to the original exercise 1, but we're putting it on the and of the 2 this time. So you're going to get 1, 2 and 3, 4. Exercise 5. Now here we're just adding an extra bass drum on the and of the 1. So we're getting 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Exercise 6, we are now playing the bass drums on the 1, the and of the 2 and the 3 and. So we're getting 1, 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2 and 3 and 4. Exercise 7, the same idea, we're just bringing a bass drum in on the and of the 1. So now we are getting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And as you can see, as we progress through these exercises, what we are doing is filling up all the spaces where the snare isn't played with a bass drum. So, exercise 8, the final one on this page. All we are doing here, as I said in the previous exercises, we are now filling up all the available space that the snare drum doesn't occupy. So here we are going to now have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
Pay attention! Important information!
So, one thing I'd like to say at the end of this page is just a few pointers on ways that you can really utilise what we've just run through. Now, the first thing is to take these exercises and apply them around the kit in different ways. For example, we have played all of our eighth notes and keeping the pulse of the grooves on our hi-hat. You can change them over onto the ride cymbal. Now, it may seem a little daunting at first, but what you've got to remember is this hand action is just being transferred over here. Nothing changes whatsoever. So here you're just tapping away quite merrily, move it over there. The exact hand action is going to continue. So from this, if we go to exercise 1 for example, so, with that idea, then what we can do is use this right hand moving round the other drums as well. So we can use the floor tom, and we can use these toms as well. So for example, exactly the same thing. My hand is still performing the same action, but we are just changing onto a different drum. I can do it on this tom. Do it on this tom. And what a really good practice is to work your way round from using the hi-hat to your first tom, to your second tom, to your floor tom, to your ride cymbal. And by doing this, you slowly get used to actually moving round the drum kit, but in a way that isn't so daunting and overwhelming. So just play, for example, 1 or 2 bars on each drum. And then you can work your way back up around the drum kit. You can also use the crash cymbals as rides. You don't want to be just belting the living daylights out of it, but you can try if you can to use crashes dynamically rather than just say absolutely pelting them hell for leather, because all you'll do, it will just wash over everything and you won't hear anything. Just relax, play them quite gently, and you'll be able to get a nice groove with them without overwhelming everybody who's in the band and your audience. So, that's the first thing I would advise when using these exercises. Just try moving it around onto different drums. So the other tip I would like to give is about something that I really, really wish I'd considered and thought about when I first started playing drums. And what that is that when you play a normal groove, if you think about the amount of work that your right hand does compared to your left hand. So for example, in just a normal drum groove, you can see the hand is doing the majority of the work. Now what will happen here is if you imagine that you're playing, for example, in a band and you're playing a couple of hour sets, that hand is getting a really strong workout while this hand is being left behind. So what happens is the technique and the strength and the stamina will build in the one hand, but not in the other. Because what happened to me was, I'd played for say 3 years and been playing a lot of stuff which was really right hand orientated, and then I went to use the left hand and it just couldn't keep up. So what I had to do was go back and then work on the left hand again, and this took me a long time to catch up. So what I suggest is this. As well as playing everything right-handed, play left-handed. So left hand on the hi-hat, right hand on the snare. This way round. By doing that from very early on, what happens is that you build up both hands equally, and you'll develop the same technique in both hands. And a good way to do this is if you play left-handed with the hi-hat and snare, and then if you want to change over to the ride and snare, then you use right-handed, so like this. It's a very simple thing to do. It will take a little bit of time to get used to, but like I say, if you do it from the very beginning, it will just become second nature, and it will also keep you very ambidextrous and help your technique to develop both ways. So that is the end of Basic Rock Rhythms page 1. On to page 2.